Yeah, wonderful to be here. Thank you, Angie, for the invite. My name is Lorena James, and I'm the founder of Invasive Impact Initiatives. We're currently a for-profit organization teaching communities how to repurpose invasive species. But the reason why I'm here to talk with you all today is to learn more about problem identification as an entrepreneur and the intersection of entrepreneurship and nonprofits. First, a little bit about myself. I'm from Buffalo originally. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina for the last 8 years or so, where I attended Davidson College for undergrad, worked for a little bit in the tech media world, went to grad school in China at Tsinghua University for I studied global affairs, and flash forward to today, where I work as a founder of Invasive Impact Initiatives as a invasive species expert in all things invasive management and upcycling. As I mentioned, we'll kind of walk through what it means to identify and almost sort of fall in love with a problem that you want to solve as an entrepreneur, how to ideate solutions, dive a little bit deeper into my work specifically with invasive impact initiatives and how it's a good kind of case example of problem identification and solution creation. And then mentioning again that bridge between entrepreneurship and nonprofits, because while we are currently a for-profit entity, we do operate kind of like a nonprofit and work very closely with nonprofits across North America. And then lastly, the last tidbit I want to leave with all of y'all is emphasizing the importance of how solutions often lie at the intersection of two disparate ideas or concepts. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into what that means in just a moment. But first, this is kind of this world that I operate in, invasive species upcycling. I like to pause and ask, I guess it might be difficult to unmute, but if any of you know what invasive species are or have heard of them, you probably have, but just in case you haven't, invasive species are often non-native plants and animals, flora and fauna that are introduced to a new part of the world, or even in some cases introduced to a new state, whether it's, on the bottoms of your shoes when you're hiking, or whether it's in ballast water. A lot of the invasives in the Great Lakes region are actually introduced through ballast water and ships. And in these new areas, they tend to wreak havoc and outcompete native species for nutrients in soil and sunlight. So it's a really big environmental issue. Kind of ties in a little bit with climate change as well. As the climate changes, invasive species can spread even further outside of their range, and they cause a lot of issues for native biodiversity. But a solution for this is upcycling. So these are kind of 6 different examples of how you can explore this kind of world of invasive species upcycling. Actually, apologies, I'm going to escape really fast. I have a feeling, again, invasive species, define what they are. They do have a lot of different, not just environmental impacts, but also economic impacts. So 400 out of the 958 US threatened or endangered species are at risk because of invasive species. So a great example are monarch butterflies. They tend to feed on a lot of native plants, like whether it's echinacea or black-eyed Susan. A couple examples of native flowers that monarch butterflies love, but those types of plants can be outcompeted for nutrients in soil or for sunlight because of invasive species. So not great for endangered species in that way. There is economic cost, especially when it comes to the agricultural impacts of invasive species management. A lot of agricultural crops can be negatively impacted by invasive species and can require a lot of use of pesticides or other forms of methods to curb the growth of invasive species. So every year, at least $138 billion is spent just in the United States on environmental damages, control, and losses caused by invasive species. And lastly, there are nonprofits that work to prevent the spread of invasives, go out and actually physically remove invasive species. There's some really great local organizations like Western New York PRISM. There are local National Wildlife Federation hubs that organize invasive removal events. But 90% of the time, approximately, these invasive plants or invasive biomass are actually just thrown away and sent to landfill, which again perpetuates more environmental harm. So why not use, again, this concept of upcycling or repurposing invasive species to kind of kill two birds with one stone, preventing the spread of invasives and then also preventing invasives that are removed instead of being sent to landfill, repurposing them into new and different products. I'll take a little bit of a step back and kind of explain a little bit about what's currently happening with the world of invasive species prevention and management as it's done today. So there are really great groups like NASMA, which stands for the North American Invasive Species Management Association, and Play Clean Go. You might have heard terms like clean, drain, dry when you're outside, maybe boating or fishing. You have to make sure you clean your fishing gear, drain your boats before moving to a new body of water, and drain and dry your fishing or boating equipment in order to prevent the spread of invasive species. With a firewood example, you don't want to move firewood from one campsite to another, especially if you're moving firewood from like one county or one state to another, because that's how you can spread invasive insects. Even invasive species can spread on your clothing or on your shoes. So if you go on a hike or even if you're outside gardening and you're maybe traveling again to a different county or even a different area of the city even, you would want to prevent the spread of invasive seeds on your clothing, on your shoes by again cleaning your clothing and shoes before you move to new locations. Even on pets as well, you have to try to brush off your pets, your dogs, your cats before maybe traveling with them, because that's also how you can spread an invasive species. So separate from upcycling, there are definitely current ways to prevent the spread of invasives, and a lot of conservation nonprofits focus on these methods of invasive species prevention. But when it comes to upcycling, as I kind of mentioned a bit previously, these are some examples of how you can explore ways to, instead of, again, removing invasive biomass and throwing it away, instead thinking of different innovative ways to repurpose invasive biomass. So I'll kind of walk through each example. This is a really cool initiative called the Great Elephant Migration, and it actually collaborates with artisans in India working with an invasive bush species. And all of these elephant sculptures are made out of the branches of these invasive bushes in India. So just this past year, it was called the Great Elephant Migration because they traveled across the United States with these art installations, these giant elephant sculptures made out of an invasive plant material, to kind of show an example of how you can take something deemed bad for the environment and create art and create something inspirational out of it. Down here with paper products, you can explore making craft paper, even making actual like functional paper like tissue paper or toilet paper or paper towels out of invasive plant biomass. We through invasive impact initiatives have explored this new method of making flower bombs, if you've heard of them. Essentially, it's a form of what people call guerrilla gardening, or you can just, make, usually it's made out of clay or sometimes recycled paper. You make it into this kind of mulch material, and then add native flower seeds to the inside, dry it out, and then throw it into an empty lot or into your backyard to grow native flowers. But we essentially were able to create that mulch material to make the flower bomb out of boiled and sterilized invasive plant material, to mix that with native flower seeds and be able to grow native flowers using processed invasive plant material as the medium. So it's been a really cool workshop that we'll host in certain areas, especially when it comes to Earth Month, and trying to find ways to share with the community how you can have like a hands-on activity to think of ways to upcycle invasive plants. So you can make the flower bombs, There's some examples of making food out of invasive biomass. Um, for example, in this image here, you might have, heard of crawfish in the South in Louisiana. You have like crawfish boils, but crawfish are actually invasive in Europe. So there's some restaurants I know in Amsterdam for sure, other areas of Europe that are removing the crawfish from local waterways and serving them in restaurants. Maybe you've heard of lionfish. They're an invasive fish in the Caribbean, also off the coast of North Carolina and some other southern states in the United States. And some groups are, again, making food, cooking the invasive lionfish, and then also making jewelry. So this is an example of some like stud earrings made out of the fins of invasive lionfish. And lastly, I'll dive into this a little bit more later, but the way that I got into this work with invasive upcycling was actually through UB's CoLab. So it's a really great full circle moment. But when I was in high school, I was working on a project making 3D printing filament out of invasive zebra and quagga mussel shells. And those are invasive species at the time. This was like 2017. They were mostly invasive just in the Great Lakes region, but since then, they've spread across most waterways across the United States. So yeah, we were able to create a 3D printing filament out of these invasive mussel shells. So these are, again, 6 different examples of how we can explore this concept of upcycling invasive species, but there's so many other examples to explore. And it's all kind of around this concept of innovation at the intersection. Like, how would you think invasive species and 3D printing filament have anything in relation to one another? At first glance, you would think, oh, there's no way you could make 3D printing filament out of invasive species. But by kind of thinking of these two very disparate concepts and ideas and finding a way to bridge them together, that's how you can create really innovative and interesting solutions for problems like environmental issues like invasive species. I'll dive a tad bit deeper into, again, my own experience with upcycling invasives. As I mentioned, the UB CoLab was a huge part of this initial kind of brainstorming concept of how to create invasive species, how to create products out of invasive species. I guess I was a senior in high school around 2017, so I competed in the high school portion of a local hackathon called Erie Hack, which was taking place in Cleveland at the time. And UB was working to encourage local youth to ideate ways to innovate around water quality issues in Lake Erie. So at the time, that was the problem that was posed to me through this hackathon experience. How can we improve water quality through entrepreneurship and innovation? At the time, actually, my initial idea wasn't to make 3D printing filament. It was how can we make food products out of invasive species growing in and around Lake Erie. But as some of you might know, Lake Erie is not the cleanest source of water. There's a lot of it's like industrial waste in and around the lake. So it's not necessarily encouraged to consume anything that is removed from Lake Erie without any sort of, I guess, like environmental testing done beforehand. So it got me thinking, how can we create something that you wouldn't consume, wouldn't put on your body? And so that's when the 3D printing filament idea came about, because obviously you're not going to eat 3D printing filament. So that was something that we thought of to try and solve this problem of invasive species growing in Lake Erie. I ended up going to college and was able to achieve some of our first early adopters, you could say, for this 3D printing concept. At the top here, you can see a picture with me and Elena, who at the time was a PhD student at the University of Akron in Ohio. And now, we're still close and we still kind of meet somewhat regularly to continue ideating other ways possibly to upcycle invasive species. Was able to submit a patent application in 2019. In 2021, as I mentioned, I went to grad school in China and started to ideate ways to, again, bring this work internationally. And as you can imagine, a lot of invasive species, well, all invasive species, are native to other parts of the world and may have cultural or traditional significance in their home countries. Quite a few invasive species that are prominent in North America are actually native to parts of Asia, like China. So it's like, how can we possibly think of ways to repurpose invasive species in ways that honor and respect the ways that they're possibly used in their home countries and traditional meals and things of that nature? So that's another way to kind of think about this problem and how to create a solution through cultural significance of invasive species. And then lastly, just this past year, we kind of pivoted away from just making one particular product out of one particular invasive species, and we're now creating more of an education platform where we're teaching communities across the globe how they can start their own invasive upcycling projects. So at the end, when I take questions, and I'll share some more resources if this idea is of interest to any of y'all, I'd be happy to help support you creating maybe your own business or project based off of upcycling and repurposing invasive species. A quick dive into what we do specifically. As I mentioned, there's the product development, so creating new different ways to create products out of invasive species, whether it's a 3D printing filament or biochar, which is essentially making fertilizer out of processed invasive biomass. We also host workshops and educational events. So whether it's, as I mentioned, making the native flower bombs or hosting events to educate communities about what invasive species are and how they can prevent their spread. On occasion, we'll do communications consulting. So recently with the North American Invasive Species Management Association, or NASMA, we were helping them with trying to essentially reach a new audience and in their words, I guess, like how to make invasive species cool and how to make invasive species I guess, yeah, more interest of interest to a wider array of audience members through social media engagement. And then lastly, we have an up and coming ambassador program where again, we're looking for community members that want to learn about invasive species and how they can start their own upcycling projects wherever they might be in the world. This initiative definitely took off a bit more in Charlotte, where I've been for the last 8 years. But now that I'm in Buffalo, I moved back like 4 months ago now, so pretty recently. Really looking to build this community more in Buffalo. So again, if this is of interest to any of y'all, would love to maybe collaborate and help you start your own invasive upcycling project. Okay, so now that I've done a little bit of the backstory, a bit about how I got into this work, let's dive a little bit deeper into kind of the really important connection I'm trying to bridge between how entrepreneurship and nonprofits, or how entrepreneurship and conservation can really come together and benefit one another. So in our world, with invasive species upcycling, we kind of view this work as a three-part model. So we kind of operate at the center of three different types of communities and organizations and types of people. So first, we must collaborate with the invasive species experts. There are the uh, community members, organizations in the world that really know how to make sure that when we're upcycling invasive species, we're not accidentally spreading them more, which definitely will work against everything that we're trying to accomplish with invasive species upcycling. So as I mentioned, there's a really great group called Western New York Prism in the local area, and they organize fairly regular invasive species removal events. Now that the weather's getting colder, those have wrapped up pretty much, but starting from, I would say, May on through the end of September, you can volunteer to remove invasive biomass, identify what invasive species are growing here in Western New York, and again, responsibly remove them. And traditionally, we would either, there's a concept called solarization. So you can kind of leave it out in bags in the sun for a few weeks, or ideally a few weeks to a couple of months. And that process with the heat hitting the bags, the bags will heat up to the point where any of the invasive biomass that has any seeds or any viable roots will die and no longer be able to propagate. So that's the traditional method of identifying, removing, and then sterilizing invasive biomass before eventually throwing it away. But then where we come in is we connect the invasive species experts to local maker spaces. So you may have heard of the Foundry here in Buffalo, or even makerspace communities on campus at UB. We would come in and essentially connect local makers and innovators that regularly visit these maker spaces and provide the invasive biomass from local invasive species experts to create and ideate ways to upcycle this invasive species biomass. So again, whether it's art projects or textile materials or paper materials or the 3D printing filament, it's really important that these three different groups in this kind of partnership ecosystem work together in order to ideate ways to upcycle invasive species, to further fund conservation initiatives, because essentially the ideal goal would be able to create a product that is economically viable in the market. In this case, the 3D printing filament is a great example where you could sell that. It not only benefits the business economically, but then you can also use those funds to further support local conservation initiatives to, again, remove more invasive species biomass, support local conservation efforts, and then that work again will support your business initiative. So it's a kind of a self-feeding cycle where we're able to support our local environment through business and entrepreneurship. And then lastly, what's really truly important is this community empowerment piece. When I got started in this work, I wasn't really doing much else in the environmental space. This concept of ideating ways to repurpose invasive species really empowered me as a local community member to learn more about other environmental issues, start doing more work with environmental justice, eventually doing work with food security issues in Western New York. And my other job right now is actually working to support smallholder farmers in the American Southeast. And I probably would not have really gotten into this work if it wasn't for this invasive upcycling world. So it's a really great example of how we can empower communities to take action when it comes to like local environmental justice issues or local environmental sustainability issues. So it's really, really great kind of business model that relies on that intersection of entrepreneurship and the nonprofit and conservation worlds. These are some examples of some of the events that we've hosted in partnership with nonprofits. These are all examples of events we've hosted actually in North Carolina. But we were able to host, for example, the flower bomb making workshop that I mentioned. We had, I would say maybe about 50 to 100 people rotate through a local community what's the word I'm looking for? Community, I guess a local maker space in Charlotte. And I would say the youngest participant we had was 5 years old. The oldest participants we've had are in their 80s. So it's a really great intergenerational workshop we can host to teach people again what invasive species are and how you can ideate ways to repurpose them into products like native flower bombs. On occasion, we'll co-host community volunteer opportunities. So in Charlotte, we co-hosted a invasive removal project at a local senior living facility in Charlotte. One quick differentiator I want to share is that state by state, there's actually different invasive species permitting laws and protocols. So North Carolina, as long as you essentially partner with a local conservation group that has the correct permitting to remove and transport invasive species safely and responsibly to upcycle them, you're good to go. In New York State, it's a little bit stricter where you actually have to have your own permit to be able to repurpose invasive species on a large scale. The permit's free and it might take you a minute to get it, but just a heads up there. If you want to explore doing this work in New York State, or if you're not from New York State and you want to go elsewhere to do this work, be sure you are aware of local invasive species permitting laws. Because yeah, that can be important to make sure you're following those rules. And then lastly, what was really super exciting last year, we actually, wow, it was this year, time flies. We hosted our very first invasive upcycling hackathon. And as I mentioned, I got into this work through a hackathon I participated in high school. So it was really great to, again, kind of have a full circle moment and host our own hackathon, specifically focusing on creating opportunities for local community members to ideate ways to repurpose local invasive species biomass. And we collaborated with our local National Wildlife Federation hub in Charlotte to make this hackathon happen. I'm definitely planning on hosting a similar hackathon in Buffalo, so stay tuned for that. These are just three different examples of how we were able to, as a for-profit entity, as an entrepreneur, be able to collaborate and support local nonprofits through our entrepreneurial endeavors. And again, I imagine sometime in the future we might eventually have our own nonprofit arm. But I think at the core of what we're doing, it's very, very entrepreneurial as we're supporting community members to create their own innovative business ideas to upcycle invasive species. So it's super crucial that you have that collaboration piece between entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders. A quick uh, I guess, kind of breakdown of the really important pieces that we emphasize, essentially our framework that we use in this world of invasive species upcycling. We call it learning about our Earth, which stands for ecology, arts, research, technology, and heritage. And these five different pieces are pretty much at the core of how we educate and share about this world of invasive species upcycling. Obviously, the ecology is very important because we're teaching communities that might not already otherwise know about what invasive species are, how as individuals we have the power to prevent the spread of invasive species, and how, yeah, it's just important for us as human beings on planet Earth to understand the plant life and the flora and fauna around us. The arts is really important because, while in entrepreneurship, I mean, you always hear tech and AI and all that is important, yes, but artists are entrepreneurs as well. And it's really important for us to emphasize the importance of creativity and the arts in this world of entrepreneurship and how it can also have intersections with technology. The research piece is crucial as well because invasive species, that world it's changing every single day. Even as we work to try to track the spread of invasive species in Western New York or other parts of the United States, they're changing. It's changing every single day. There's one particular plant called kudzu, which is prominent in mostly in the American South, but you can find it sometimes in parts of New York State. Um, but it's known as the vine that ate the South because it grows so quickly. And I might be getting this wrong, but I'm like 90% sure that this plant grows a foot a day. It grows so quickly. So in this constantly changing world of invasive species growth and management, the research is super important and collaborating with conservation experts and with ecologists and with botanists is very, very crucial to make sure that the work is having the impact that we need it to have in our community. The tech piece is important as well, as I mentioned, whether you're creating innovative ways to create like 3D printing filament or even using tech to physically track the spread of invasive species through GIS or other tracking tools. The tech piece is very important. And last but certainly not least, invasive species upcycling, it's not a new concept. Um, Upcycling has been happening since the dawn of humankind. It's a very traditionally indigenous practice. We definitely want to make sure that, as I mentioned, not only are we honoring the ways that invasive species might be used or consumed in their home countries, but also collaborating with local indigenous artisans and leaders who understand how to create crafts out of native species that can be applied to how we repurpose invasive species. Again, whether it's like through basket weaving, as you can kind of see here, or other forms of traditional art making that can be important in indigenous communities. That's again a really key important part of this work we have to collaborate with Indigenous experts and leaders to make this work impactful for everyone in the community. This is the only chart in this presentation, but I do want to share it because it's kind of shows you how important upcycling can be in this world of invasive species management. This is called an invasion curve, and it essentially shows you, based on the amount of time an invasive species has been in an area, how likely you are to completely eradicate it. So on the left-hand side, when you're at the prevention stage, yeah, that can look like again, making sure you're cleaning your clothing or cleaning the bottoms of your shoes to prevent the spread of invasive seeds if you're going on hikes across the country, or if you're even gardening and say you're gardening in Buffalo and then you want to go on a hiking trip in California and you don't want to spread invasive seeds, you need to make sure you clean your bottoms of your shoes before you travel across the country. What's really interesting too in the sports world, if you play soccer or football or any sport that might involve getting like mud stuck to the bottoms of your cleats, whenever you're traveling internationally, TSA was really, really strict on making sure that you are not transporting like clods of dirt on the bottoms of your shoes if you're an athlete, or even for golfers as well. I can count like on your golf clubs. That's a really, really simple way to make sure you're preventing the spread of invasive species at the beginning of this invasion curve. As we go further down this chart, the kudzu that I mentioned, for example, it was introduced to the US in the 19th century, so it's been here for quite a while. And it's had a lot of time to spread across the Southeast and even make its way up north to parts of, I know Long Island for sure has some issues with kudzu. And as I mentioned, it grows up to a foot every single day, which is insane. So I don't think we'll ever be able to completely get rid of kudzu, but upcycling can be a really great tool to make sure that we have a sustainable long-term management of invasive species that have been an issue in certain communities for hundreds of years even. There's one caveat I'd like to share. Some invasive species, depending on their growth patterns, can actually become naturalized. So one example of that are dandelions. Dandelions actually were introduced to the US, I believe, during the 17th century. And over the course of the years, has become a naturalized species where it's no longer causing significant environmental harm to native species. So while it's not native to the US or native to North America, it is naturalized, it's no longer invasive. I just emphasize that not all non-native species are considered invasive. They're only invasive if they cause detrimental impact to native species, native biodiversity. So that's one caveat there, but the kudzu will always be invasive. So we need that long-term management through upcycling to curb and control its spread. One of the last things I want to share here are three different examples of invasive species and kind of the way that I and our team at Invasive Impact thinks about invasive species upcycling, and I'll walk through each pretty quickly. I mentioned the zebra mussels that we use to make 3D printing filament, but they are native to Eastern Europe and Western Asia. And the environmental harm it causes in areas where it's invasive includes clogging water intake pipes, outcompeting other native mussel species, and altering ecosystems. For example, because of the way that zebra mussels and quagga mussels as well filter water through their bodies. It can actually cause an increase in algae blooms in Lake Erie. As some of you might know, Lake Erie is renowned for our issues with algae blooms, so invasive species can actually perpetuate that issue even further. So by providing both an educational and economic incentive to remove these invasive species from Lake Erie, we're able to improve the water quality of the lake. Traditionally, in their home countries in Eastern Europe and Western Asia, zebra mussels have actually been used in folk jewelry. So, earrings, necklaces, buttons on clothing, decorative inlays on art pieces, and even in certain architectural examples, and even as chicken feed supplements. So, looking again to the traditional uses of zebra mussels, you can ideate ways to upcycle and possibly create your own project or business off of upcycling zebra mussels. So that's one example there. Garlic mustard, an invasive plant, is native to Europe and parts of Asia, and its negative environmental impacts includes reducing forest regeneration, or releasing chemicals that prevent fungi from supporting native tree seedlings. And again, it's a form of utilizing too many nutrients in the soil that prevents the growth of native flora. So in its traditional context, it's actually can be used. It's very edible, so the leaves can be used in salads, sauces, and even making like a garlic pesto. It does have like some of a garlicky flavor to it. So you can actually find recipes for how you can cook with garlic mustard. I do have to share a caveat though that as I mentioned, especially when it comes to consuming anything that grows in a polluted area where the soil might have some pollution, you want to avoid eating invasive plants where you don't necessarily know where like the soil quality. I know foraging is really awesome and great, but as I guess a legal entity, I have to share that I don't necessarily recommend you going outside and eating plants wherever you might find them. But foraging is a form of learning more about the world around you and learning more about local ecology. Um, but I guess a quick caveat there. But garlic mustard is edible, and it's a pretty tasty pesto if you were to make that. The last example I want to share, if any of y'all are from New York City or have been in New York City or even DC, pretty much anywhere south, I would say, of Virginia, you probably have seen lanternflies. They are native to China, Vietnam, and India, and this is one example where actually lanternflies do not have any really cultural or traditional significance in their home countries. They are also a environmental pests, you could say, in their home countries. They feed on more than 70 different plant species, especially fruit trees, and they encourage sooty mold growth, which is very detrimental to the growth of native plants and trees. Um, What's really, really cool, I think, I'm not the biggest bug person. Most of the invasive upcycling that I do myself is either with aquatic or plant invasives, but there are some really, really cool artists exploring how the pigment from the wings can be used to make a natural dye. I found recently a really cool artist that's making collages out of the wings of lanternflies. Again, so with this world of invasive upcycling at Invasive Impact Initiatives, we do host our own workshops, but part of it is highlighting the work of other invasive upcyclers. So I'm not sure if I would ever work with the lanternflies, but I applaud the artists that do and share their work on our platform if you're interested in checking that out. The very last thing that I want to share, it kind of is a summary to all of this, and as I mentioned earlier, that solutions lie at the intersection, whether it's the intersection of invasive species management and 3D printing, or the intersection of lanternflies and collage making or natural dyes. It's very two disparate concepts can be brought together to form very innovative business ideas. A really great book that I recommend, and actually I think it was introduced to me originally through UB's CoLab. A few years ago, probably back in like 2017, 2018. This book I think was written in 2004, but it's still very relevant today. It's The Medici Effect, written by Franz Johansson, and it's very similarly talking about innovation at the intersection. So the example you can see on the book cover is how elephants and epidemics can teach us about innovation. I won't ruin it for you, but I do recommend you read the book to find out the intersection of elephants and epidemics. But this is a really great book to help jog your brain a little bit more about how to ideate solutions to problems, especially environmental problems, through the intersection of two very different disparate concepts or ideas. If this work is interesting to you, or even if you already have your own startup or entrepreneurial endeavor, two resources I would love to share that I've personally experienced, and also they also definitely highly support this concept of solutions lying at the intersection are Be Visioneers, and it's a fellowship sponsored by Mercedes-Benz, but it's essentially a 1 to 3 year program, depending on how long you want to participate, that will provide mentorship and sponsorship and possibly funding opportunities for your entrepreneurial endeavor. You do have to be between, I believe it's between the ages of 16 and 28, which I believe all of you should be in that age range most likely. So I recommend that you apply. The application is currently open for cohort 4. I'm a member of cohort 3, and so far I've had a really great experience. It's a global opportunity, so anyone, anywhere in the world, for the most part, can apply. I believe there are a few countries not included. I do not think Canada is included in this, but because you go to UB, you are eligible to apply. So I recommend that. And then the Holt Prize, actually, I have not applied for this yet. Would like to because you have to be a current student to apply for the Holt Prize, and you can compete. I believe it's for $1 million in funding through this organization. Again, it's international in scope. Anyone, anywhere in the world can apply, but it supports student entrepreneurs in funding their innovative ideas around, I believe it has to be around the sustainable development goals, so not necessarily environmentally focused, but there needs to be some sort of social impact piece in this work. The same actually goes for Be Visioneers, and that's really emphasizing that importance of the intersection of entrepreneurship and the nonprofit world. There is, I guess, this concept of social entrepreneurship, which invasive impact initiatives would count as a social entrepreneurial endeavor. Um, but yes, if either of those opportunities are of interest to you, I highly recommend that you apply to possibly get some funding for your innovative social entrepreneurial endeavors. And that's all I have. I'll pause there. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. If you want to keep in touch, this QR code will take you to essentially a link tree with some more resources on how to possibly start your own invasive upcycling endeavor. Or feel free to shoot me an email at info@invasiveimpact.org. But yes, I will stop there and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Lorena. My name is Devin. Thank you so much for the presentation and giving us all those resources. I really appreciate that. I guess the question I have for you, I do admire how you used how your journey is sculpted around incorporating like the entrepreneurial lens in sustaining or like promoting what you your goals and your values, which is really amazing. And that's something that I really want to incorporate down in like in my lifetime because I'm practicing as a nurse. So I want to kind of do the same thing and target like undermined communities. So I think that was really insightful. I just wanted to ask about your background. I know you talked about continuing your master's in China, which was kind of cool. But I was gonna ask, like, were there any cultural differences that affected how like invasive species were viewed over there, and if there were any upcycling techniques that were different culturally that you saw
Definitely.
internationally? Yeah, sorry.
You're great. Yeah, thanks for the question, Devin. I appreciate it. Yes, so what's been really interesting, not even just in China, but in other countries, we've been exploring doing this work, including Mexico. Um, it's been really great in the US and in Canada. We have this culture of volunteering. It's pretty standard for students or even like middle school or high school students or adults to volunteer at local nonprofits. But what I've learned in China and in my experiences in Mexico as well is that volunteer opportunities are sometimes a little bit harder to find. So in this model, I'll scroll back up, where we're relying on these invasive species experts to organize invasive removal volunteer opportunities, that those don't really happen too much in China. Um, it's really up to local conservation organizations to remove invasive species, and they don't necessarily host like publicly facing volunteer opportunities to remove invasive. So that's one kind of, I guess, a challenge and difference. But there are definitely still ways to um, do like larger scale manufacturing projects in China, because I mean there's so many more factories there that would be interested in upcycling invasive biomass. So it's like that's kind of how I've balance the workout in the US. There's a bit more of a focus on the environmental education and working with local communities to both remove and upcycle invasive species. But so far in China, it's been more so collaborating with local, I guess, like government leaders and with local conservation experts that can directly divert invasive biomass to factories directly to create products at a larger scale. That's an example there. And then the last thing I'll share in the Mexico bit that I shared, in Mexico, I would say there's even less of a culture of volunteering there than in China. But we're still able to collaborate with local artisans that are creating really cool jewelry out of like mostly invasive aquatic species like lionfish. And we're working to help support them in selling their products internationally uh, to support their, I guess, supporting their livelihood through invasive upcycling. But yeah, it's every country has their own differences. I mean, even I mentioned it's state by state, it's even different, but that makes the work more exciting. I'm constantly learning every day how to make this product viable in different contexts.
No, yeah, that sounds very interesting. That's really cool, actually. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I thank you for your work for the ecosystem
yeah,
because
I
really need
appreciate it.
it.
We're working on it.
We
We're
need
making
it.
progress. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I just have a quick question. I was wondering if you could talk a little more about the 3D printing filament. Like, is it still for sale? Like, I'm just curious about that because it seems like such a fascinating idea.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so the 3D printing filament, there's a really cool group called Philibot. They're based in Vermont, and they still sell machinery to extrude your own 3D printing filament. So even if you want to explore making 3D printing filament out of like plastic water bottles or old CDs, you can do that at home. So we were using their machinery to make the filament. While it printed successfully, the material was brittle, for lack of a better word. So we were selling it uh back in like 2017, 2018, but have paused for now, as we kind of try to ideate ways to make the filament a bit more durable. So yeah, the quick answer, not currently selling it, but trying to find any like material scientists that are willing to collaborate to attempt to make the filament a bit more stable in its printing qualities. But yeah, Philibot was a really great partner in making the filament functional through their machinery. But yeah, the brittleness was an issue for us in the beginning.
Thank you so very much for a really great presentation and engagement. And honestly, I'm learned a lot today myself. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, happy to be here. I'll be floating around, so maybe our paths will cross again. But appreciate being able to share a bit more about my work with invasive impact.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending today.